Hello and welcome to the Keep It Local Maine podcast, where we tell the stories of local business owners and Maine residents and learn more about what they do, who and what inspires them, their challenges, successes, and more. My name is Todd Regalinski.
And I am Kimberly Regalinski.
And we are the publishers of Keep It Local Maine, a local magazine that helps showcase local businesses to the people in and around their communities. Thank you for tuning in to our weekly podcast that you can subscribe to on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. You can learn more about us at keepitlocalmaine.com and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram through the links in the show notes.
This episode is sponsored by Fabian Oil, a family-owned and operated business that offers heating oil and propane delivery, services, and repairs. Fabian has been serving central and northern Maine with propane and oil for over 30 years. As a local Maine business, they cherish the relationships they have formed by serving the people of their communities. In 2019, Fabian entered the southern Maine region with a heating oil acquisition, and they have recently brought propane to the market. They are aggressive and would love to be your supplier. Give them a call at 207-793-2044 or visit fabianoil.com.
In this episode, we'll be talking with Will Drury from Maine Magic Mud. Will grew up on the island of Vinalhaven. After college, he returned home to pursue his dreams of small business ownership. He founded Maine Magic Mud after his experience with the effectiveness of an old local remedy. Running a business 12 miles off the coast comes with a unique set of challenges, but Will has continued to face them with the adaptability born of island life.
Welcome to the show, Will. We're so glad that you're here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so glad that you're here today and excited to learn more about your business. You came to this business in a really personal and unique way. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in school. I went to UNE down in Biddeford, directly out of high school. I took a couple gap years, but I did go to UNE. I was coming home on the weekends to go lobstering. And that was just sort of to make money, to sort of pay for my time at school, try to graduate with as little debt as possible. And, as the winter progressed, I was coming home and it would be, 20 degrees or less out on the boat. You'd be in the gloves, rockfish spikes in your hands, and your hands would just get freezing cold, wet. And then, 24 hours later or less, I'd be in this like sort of stifling hot, dry classroom. And that transition sort of really wreaked havoc on my skin. And it was getting to the point where my hands were peeling. It was embarrassing and debilitating in some ways. And I was trying absolutely everything. I went to various stores, got lots of different moisturizers, was doing what I could. And it almost was exacerbating the problem. Like everything was sticking on my hands. And then one weekend I was home and I remembered this old trick that we'd used growing up. And it was, we would play around on an island off the island. So just about as remote as possible. And, we were far enough away from sort of the medical center or anything else that if you got a bee sting or poison ivy or just sort of anything, what we would do is you'd glob on a bunch of the mud from the flat. You'd leave it for a while. You'd scrub it off and it would like sort of pull out the stinger and it would sort of soothe the poison ivy. So I was like, I've tried everything else. I might as well try that. And brought some back to school with me. And it's sort of, the exfoliating process where it actually took off the dead skin as opposed to just trying to keep it there the way that the moisturizers I've been using were. Really solved the problem. And from there, I was I'd always wanted to own a business. I finished college, got back home, sort of was thinking about the resources I had available to me, which as a broke college kid was almost nothing. I was like, I could still get my hand on some mud. Remembered that experience, and sort of the rest is history, if you will.
So how did you guys come up with this idea at a young age to put mud on it? How did that transpire?
It was a trick that my aunt especially used a lot, but it was something that we just always done. I don't, it's one of those things that you use it from such an early age, or you're doing at such an early age that sort of the origin becomes kind of vague. I mean, there's a lot of sort of, some of the marketing people that we worked with sort of try to make it sort of an old homeopathic local remedy. And I always feel a little bit sketchy saying that because that's not exactly true. It's not something that people aren't walking around on Vinalhaven with mud slobbed on them, but
that would be really cool.
That would be extraordinarily interesting. It wouldn't really do a lot for the sort of stereotypical island. I don't know, but yeah. So there's a lot of people that have gone for that angle, the angle of it being sort of a local tradition. But it's not really quite that. It's just something my family always did, and it's something that I think, when you don't have access to a lot of different tools, you use the tools available, and it was one of those tools. And then, as we did more research, and this is maybe further along, but as we did more research, we realized how sort of scientifically valuable the mud was as well. I mean, beyond just anything, it was objectively good for your skin.
Now, what was your degree in from UNE?
My degree is in English.
Okay, because I was curious because I'm thinking, okay, has to be like a business degree, either that or he's like a wicked smart scientist who's got who had test tubes around him his entire time. That is really cool.
Yeah, I love it.
So I did English. I did a couple of the different sort of UNE offered some. It was called BizWiz at the time, sort of like an entrepreneurial contest. So I participated in that. So it's always been something that I've been interested in. I actually was just talking to my sister 2 nights ago, sort of, and we were kind of talking about life in general and going down that road. And it's like, I like to think of, and without being dramatic or anything, I like to think of myself as sort of somebody that likes to just sort of create things that can be helpful. And that sort of was where this went. And I don't know if I'm shooting myself in the foot here, but it wasn't like I've grown up with a passion for skincare. It was just something that I thought that I could do that would be helpful, that would be interesting to do, and would give me the freedom to start my own business and do stuff like that.
And it's cool because you saw that need. You saw that there obviously was a need, just experiencing that through your own personal, trials with different products. So you saw a need and you created that need. So that's really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So on your website, you refer to the big two, and instantly, of course, because I've watched a lot of sports. I was like, wait a minute, the big two? Who's the big two? I'm familiar with the big three, but so if you could tell our listeners, what are the big two, and how do they make your product better?
So the big two are the mud and the kelp extract. And sort of from a business side, those are our sort of value-added ingredients. They're what we have that are different than anybody else. And the mud is sort of the most straightforward and personal and has to go with that story. And into the scientific side of it, the mud has got, it's got plenty of silica in it. It's got magnesium, which is proven to reduce acne and improve anything you've got wrong with your skin. And sodium, which actually weirdly, before I started this business, I had no idea would be helpful, is actually really good for your skin, like in a topical kind of a way. And so that's the mud. And then we also we lean in and sort of do a little bit of theorizing about sort of the benefits of this mud specifically, which are just this eons of carbon-based life forms in the Gulf of Maine on a resource that really hasn't been touched before. The way that a farmer might leave a field fallow so that it can sort of redevelop the nitrogen you need, as it applies to the nutrients that might exist in a sediment. The mud's been fallow for literally ever. Yeah. And so that's sort of, it's just building all of these beneficial minerals. And then the kelp is our liquid base. And that is, we actually got put in contact. There was an article in the Working Waterfront. And after that article came out, a bunch of people started reaching out. And somebody that reached out actually had used to work for Tom's of Maine. And he put me in contact with a guy that was working with Johns Hopkins. And he wasn't working there now, but he'd worked with them before. And he was working on various kelp extracts using the enzymes. And we had a conversation, a dialogue with him, and we've slowly worked that kelp extract into our sort of liquid-based products that you don't want the grit of a mud in. And the benefits of kelp are relatively endless, and they're somewhat acknowledged, and there are other people that use kelp. but there's very few people that are using sort of a kelp enzyme extract. And in fact, the only other people that we actually are relatively confident are using something like that are I'm not sure if I should name drop or not, but I just know that this is one of their main ingredients, and they're like the most expensive skincare product out there. And their biggest ingredient is a kelp extract. And we sort of are doing it, and we're not charging $400 for a 2-ounce bottle. So
Well, that's always helpful.
yeah, and those are the two. I mean, and I can rattle off if you want, the sort of list of benefits of kelp. I could go into some of those. But those are the big two: the kelp and the mud.
And you guys have some new products coming out this year as well. Can you tell us about those?
Absolutely. So in March we had our revitalizing skin cream come out, which is sort of our most focused and potent, if you will, cream so far. We have another moisturizer, but it's just sort of your basic moisturizer. This cream is a little bit more heavy on the vitamin E's, sort of trying to be anti-aging and stuff like that. That came out in March. And we've also got a new facial serum that's going to hopefully drop in May. And that is, it's going to be our most scientific product so far, apart from a new version of the kelp extract, which is going to really sort of try and intensify the enzymes. We're actually going to have to give a little blurb with this serum about how you use it and sort of the process of getting it involved into your routine. But it's going to have a bunch of vitamins, DMAE, and A, C, B3, B5, and E are the vitamins that we're hoping to get into it, if we can figure out how to make that all sort of work together cohesively.
Oh, that's exciting.
That's really, I mean, the funny thing is, like, I understand very little of the science of this, but it is really cool.
It is cool, yeah.
Like, that just sounds really cool. And it's great that, to be developing new products and to be improving products as well as you're kind of getting deeper into this process as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been to be honest with you, when we started, the science that went into this stuff, it was something that was relatively foreign to me, and wasn't something, maybe naively, wasn't something that I was entirely, it wasn't something I was expecting. I had no idea it was as involved as it is. But as you get into it, it really is, even if you don't have a passion for it, it really is quite interesting to look at the different minerals, ingredients, and the properties that they have, and the ways that they interact with each other, and then interact with your skin, and try to figure out the real ideal combination so that you can have an effective product that hopefully sort of serves everybody's needs, but also is environmentally friendly, environmentally sustainable.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would imagine kelp is a pretty sustainable ingredient to work with. I mean, it has. I mean, I would think that grows pretty rapidly, doesn't it? Absolutely.
I mean, it does, and and it's everywhere. We sort of get ours, from people that are growing it professionally. But yeah, it grows relatively quickly, and the process of diluting it is, I think that I've had this fear, because we are sort of going for the natural side of things. I've had this like standing fear that the extract element sort of would turn people off, because I think that it sort of denotes a little bit of processing.
Yeah.
But the processing is really, we haven't gotten into it specifically. I don't know, maybe it's just hyper paranoia of like it being used if it's really great. But it really isn't. It's not like we're dumping piles and piles of chemicals in. Essentially, what you're doing is just intensifying what's already there.
Yeah. I think it's actually a good thing that you're thinking about that's been a thought in your mind. I mean, it just shows how much care you're putting into this and how much thought you're putting into it. I think it's good to hear someone who is that thoughtful about the product they're doing and how that affects how they're framing it and who might be interested in using it.
And the other side of that too is the sort of being as open as possible, because I think that, just objectively in big picture, one of the reasons there's so much miscommunication that goes on is that people aren't open enough, which is why I've sort of leaned into as I describe my business, as I describe the things that go into it, I try to be a little bit, without overdoing it, try to be a little bit meta by acknowledging those kind of things. Even in my product blurbs on the site, that's right out front. I acknowledge the fact that that word, that the extract might be something that people are like, ooh, what's that? Or that we have sort of stabilizing agents in some of our products, like the exfoliant and the moisturizer, that I think sort of some companies that sort of go for that high organic, and not to degrade anybody, but that go for those sort of organic labels, they all have these ingredients that they've found a workaround to either not include or to call something else. But you need a stabilizer or your product separates. And then you just can't, then you don't have a way to use it. So we try to acknowledge that and be like, okay, well, the weird name that you're seeing on that ingredients list is this, this, and this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people are relatively understanding, just as long as you're kind of upfront about that. And also explain it in a way that, someone like me who's like, I do not understand these ingredients that you be speaking of in chemistry and things like that. I think that's a really thoughtful thing, and shows a lot of, thought and care for your customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, in Maine, you have, in some ways, it's such a symbiotic relationship. Not only do I actively care about my customers, because customers, I mean, any business cares about their customers because they're how you make money. But in Maine, I mean, everything is so small in some ways. I would say, and this goes true for lots of businesses from all the research that I've done, but this 90-something% of my business is returning customers. So, and I know, I wouldn't say half of them, but something like that. I will, even if I don't know their name, if I wouldn't recognize them on the street, I see that so-and-so has placed an order, and I sort of know what it is, and I sometimes write a thank you letter. The customer is so important when you've got a small business, that it becomes a personal relationship in some ways.
Yeah. That's great. No, totally. I think that's the same for us.
For sure.
I might, again, I'm here in the engine room, shoveling coal, and I don't get out like Kim does to go and see a lot of our clients, but I feel like I know their preferences and what they're looking for when I come to design their ad and work with them. Even though I might not recognize them if I pass them on the street if they don't have a photo in their ad.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Will, you've made giving back to the Maine community a central goal of your business. Can you tell us how you do that?
Absolutely. So we have partnered with, over time, a couple different organizations. And partner may be strong. Essentially what we do, because we are sort of removed, but what we do is reach out and we go, what are your needs? What could we do to help? Is there a way that you could use the stuff that we're already creating for your needs? And then the one that we've been working with most recently is Preble Street in Portland, which is a resource center. I think it's primarily for teens, but they sort of provide a space for people to go. And we've worked with them, and we give them product when we can, if that's what they're interested in. Largely speaking, though, what we do is we just take a percentage of sales, put it into a little bit of a kitty, and when that gets to a certain amount of money, we buy whatever it is that they're looking for at whatever moment, which can be stuff like razors, toothbrushes, all of that good stuff. We've had a couple. It was funny actually, because we tried to go a little bit overboard, I think, a year ago, and we used blankets as a packaging material for like a couple hundred razors and toothbrushes and everything else. And it turned out the blankets were the only thing that they can't take based on some sort of health and human services type thing. They just aren't allowed to take the blanket. So it's been a very interesting sort of relationship. It definitely lulled during COVID. We reached out relatively recently to try to sort of get that back on track. But it's been really great. And the thing about that, and the thing about just reaching out in general, because we do stuff sort of locally as well when we can, is more, to me, the whole thing, business and everything else, is so holistic that if you have extra, you should try to figure out a way to redistribute that in an as effective way as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just sort of what we try to do. And that comes from a lifetime of people that I interact with, of like largely one of my grandmother, my parents, sort of being able to notice when you're at that point has been something that I try to focus on, and is like, so when I started the business, we reached out to Preble well before we had the extra resources to donate.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted giving back to be part of the business from day one, so that when we grew, we would have the infrastructure and we wouldn't sort of get lost in the growth that I think can blind businesses from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
oh, that's great. That's a great idea, and how you kind of set that up.
Yeah, and that can be, I mean, it's true. You can get in tunnel vision with business very easily.
And you can get that tunnel vision. And I don't even really, and I think that this is one of the things, one of the sort of miscommunications. I don't hold it against people that happens to, because I absolutely understand that to accomplish anything, you need that kind of focus, that drive, which is why I think taking a step back, and even if you can do it up front, thinking of it as a whole, thinking of your relationship with the community as a whole, is so important before you get down into the trenches, because the trenches are deep and you can only see one way.
Right.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, make sure you pull the stuff into the tunnel.
Yeah, exactly.
Beforehand.
Exactly.
So it's interesting that you're talking about, setting all this up before you kind of even had the ability to follow through on it, which kind of leads me to the next question of, how do you define success, whether professionally or even personally?
So I would define success as having a life that is comfortable while participating in a meaningful way in the overall improvement of society and your local community.
Mm.
I mean, and I think that may sound cliche on some level, but I really think that at the end of the day, the reason cliches are cliches in some ways and sometimes is because they have a kernel of truth. And I really do believe that, even outside of starting a business, that would be what I would define success as for myself.
Mm. Yeah.
It's better than what I got.
No, it's great.
Well, what's yours?
Oh, wait, no. We already interviewed ourselves on our first episode. I'm trying to hold that off. It's just much easier for me to be over here and
no, I
chuckle.
love that. It's true, and it goes back to, I think, to just having purpose. Being able to get up each day and know that you're doing something purposeful, right? And that you are kind of making a difference. And I think that that's huge. And that's, you saw a need and you created something, that fulfills that need. So it's really cool.
100%. And honestly, that has been sort of, in the real nitty gritty, that has been sort of that purpose, that pursuit of purpose is one of the most challenging things to try to make sure you've got your eye on. Because at times, I think, when you're doing a lot of the parts of a business and you end up being like, okay, I need to make an Instagram post today, sometimes there's a lethargy can set in, because you're like, well, why am I doing that? Am I doing that because I want to make an Instagram post? Not really. I'm trying to continue to get my company and my brand out there. And if you don't have that big picture, the purpose of that post becomes very sort of meaningless, isn't the right word that I'm looking for, but it's like, it becomes redundant, and you can develop this sort of apathy. And if you don't have that whole view, and it sort of maintaining that perspective, looking at it through the lens of what you're trying to accomplish on a big picture is something that I try to keep an eye on and sometimes lose sight of when I'm in the weeds writing my expense reports.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So tell us, as a business owner, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned in the past year or the past couple of years as, owning a business?
So this is, I always fear that this is going to make me sound either naive, well, certainly naive, but potentially arrogant, in that it is way harder than I thought. And in that, I mean, and I'm just in the spirit of complete disclosure, when I started this business when I graduated in 2017, it was like July that I really started working. And I was planning to have Maine Magic Mud have a CEO and be able to work on my next project by July of the next year. And that was my plan at the time, because I want to be a serial entrepreneur and whatever else. And that is just, looking back on it, so naive based on what you need to do, the amount of attention you need to give to a business. But that's the biggest lesson. That if you're going to do something like start a business, you've got to be ready to go in with 2 feet for a relatively indefinite amount of time.
Right, for sure.
I love how that also kind of feeds into what you had said earlier. And it reminds me just sometimes that as much as ignorance can be a negative thing, ignorance can also be, kind of a saving grace when you start something out with blind optimism or you're a little bit naive, because if you knew ahead of time the work that was involved, you probably wouldn't have done it. But once you're in it, then you're like, all right, well, I've already done this amount of work, and well, there's more work to do, and you're much more likely to carry on. I mean, I can think of that in many ways in our business, that we've hit that point where we're like, oh, I didn't know that was how that was going to work. Did you know? I didn't know. Oh, okay. Well, can't quit now. I guess we just keep on going.
That is absolutely such a unique and powerful perspective. When you think, I mean, really, that's so optimistic. I'm really impressed with that sort of that yoga stretch to that side of it. I mean, that's really powerful.
Well, don't be too impressed, because the way I also think about it is, Wile E. Coyote doesn't fall until he notices he has run off the cliff. If he just kept running, he'd be all right. It's when he looks down and goes, uh-oh, ping, and that's it. So it kind of might take the shine off of that Zen-like perspective. That's my illustration,
Shine's overrated. That's why I work with mud.
You know what? Exactly. So another question that we really like to ask, because again, it's always different, is who or what inspires you?
So what inspires me is, in terms of the giving back, is the group, the family, the people I grew up with and around. My grandmother especially was extremely sort of self-aware at her, sort of in academia, well aware of sort of the benefits that we had, and we in the island that we would play on, she participated in and was a driving factor in placing a bunch of that into a conservation easement, so that it would stay as a forever wild, is sort of what we call it. And just being aware of the things that you have and the things that you should contribute, that really largely came from her. As it applies to the entrepreneurial bent, I don't know exactly, trying to decipher where that came from. I don't know. I think that on some level, that's just something that's always been there for me. When I see something, when I was little, I didn't sort of daydream about being in the NBA. I daydreamed about this. I literally can name it. This is when I was like 7. I called it the atom changer, and it was something that you could like use to sort of manipulate, change different objects into other objects. Like nice. That literally was that's what I thought about. I would just think about things and problems and how to solve them, and want to sort of create stuff. And that is just that was way more innate than anything else. So that it's tough to put an origin on that, because I think it's just something that's always been there.
Yeah.
Well, hearing that now, I mean, the fact that you wanted to basically change one thing into another, that totally makes sense, that now you've grown up and become a mud wizard.
Exactly. Yeah. I haven't given up on that. I've made it a little bit more specific.
Yeah. I mean, that's you have achieved a childhood dream.
I love it.
Absolutely.
And feel free to use that illustration in your biography like 10, 15 years from now. Just a little citation for me. That's all I ask.
100%. When I've got my magic wand out there with or when I'm walking down the street, like completely nothing, just hoping for the best.
No. Well, Will, thank you so much for taking time out of your day and talking with us and sharing about your business and sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
It's been great.
I'll make sure that I have links to your social media pages as well as your website where people can order directly off your website, correct?
Absolutely. Yep. And we run specials all the time.
Awesome. So I'll have a link to that. And, once again, we wish you great success going forward, especially with the new product. And thank you
This
again.
is great. We wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you again to our sponsor, Fabian Oil. Be sure to contact them for all your propane and heating oil needs using the information in the show notes. And thank you for listening.